Welcome to this, the last video in a series of 6 as the Introduction to Music Fundamentals. In this particular video, we are going to be dealing with the grouping of notes. So we need to try and make life easier for those who are going to be reading the music that we write, or maybe for ourselves if we are writing music to remember that in the future, or if we are going to perform from a particular piece of music that we have written. Note values are divided according to time signatures so that we can see exactly what the meter is. But there is another level of dividing notes which helps musicians see the individual pulses of each bar. This next level is governed by a set of conventions which we are going to learn now.
Sanibonani futhi enye video siyenzayo le yokuvala la sikhuluma ngendlela yokuhlela umculo ukuze kube lula kumuntu ofundayo nomuntu odlalayo understand kube lula nje ukwazi ukuthi okay ngiqala la ngihamba kanje ngohlelo olucacile. Sikhuluma la ngento ekuthiwa inkomba siqa ngegama lesingisi la khona lithi time signature. So into ekunikezayo iklu leyo nokunikeza ukuthi ube nolwazi oluphelele ukuthi umculo wami ngizodlala ngale ndlela kanje. So iya ngokuhlukana ke sokuchaza lokho ngokuya phambili.
So let's look at the rules. There are 7 rules, but rule number 1 is definitely the longest because it has several exceptions to it. So the first rule is in simple time, the pulse divides into groups of 2. So for example, in 4/4 time, where the pulses are crotchets, the quavers are grouped in 2s.
Sinemthetho ke ehambisanayo nala loluhlelo lesifunda ngalo manje. Umthetho oqala ila mesikhuluma khona ngento ekuthiwa simple time, igama la khona lesizulu lithi ukuhlukana kabili yomgqiqo. So lamagama abalekile kumele siwafunde nje siwajwayele ngoba siwasebenzisa kakhulu. Ngiliphinde futhi lithi ukuhlukana kabili komgqiqo. Sibiza ke ngokuthi ilo simple time ngegama lesingisi. So leyo nto isichazelani iculo elinaleyo nto leyo esibiza ngokuhlukana kabili komgqiqo sibona ngokuthi ibe no 44. Leza number lezo uyibona screenini sakhe ezo 44 ngobona zona ukuthi kusuke kukhuluma ngokuhlukana kabili komgqiqo.
The second part of rule 1 is that in compound time, pulses divide into groups of 3. So, for example, in 6/8, where the pulses are dotted crotchets, the quavers are grouped in 3s. If you look at the screen now, you'll see that in 6/8 there are 2 groups of 3 quavers which are beamed together.
Lesiqhubeka sibona into esibiza ngokuthi inkomba sikhathi engcube. Mesikhuluma ngento enjalo into ekunikeza iclue ukuthi sikhuluma ngani. Mawubona u68 azi ukuthi sikhuluma ngenkomba sikhathi engcube. Ila khona umculo wethu uhlukanisa lento siyibiza ngani ngomgqiqo. Uzokhumbula eqaleni ukuthi umgqiqo sikhuluma ngepulse. Lapho isuke umgqiqo ngamunye uhlukaniswe amanothi amathathu kanjalo.
So there are exceptions to rule 1. So these are the things that we have to learn now. In 2/4 time, 4 quavers, and only if there are 4 quavers, can be beamed together in one group. So all 4 quavers in 2/4 time can be grouped together like you can see on the screen, but only if there are 4 quavers in the bar. If there are 3 quavers in the bar, you can't put them together. They must be in groups of 2. But if there are 4, you can put them all together.
Kunama exception akhona ke la wale mthetho lesikhuluma ngayo. Mothatha ukubheka lapha screenini sakho no 24. Lapha yana besithe iquaver inegama lakhona lesizulu. Engimele siloke silikhumbula singalikhohle. Sithe ingxenye yenothi elisiqhisinye. So mongabe ukuthi unawo 4 kanje or amane ngegama lakhona lesizulu, uvumelekile ukuthi ungawahlanganisa wonke kanye abe u4, kodwa leyo nto yenzeka kuphela mangabe sikhuluma ngo 42 kuphela kwinkomba yesikhathi sethu.
The second exception to Rule 1 is similar to the last one. In 3/4 time, when there are 6 quavers in the bar, and only when there are 6, can they be beamed together in one group. So all 6 of them can be under one beam, but only if there are 6.
Siphinde sibe ne-exception yesibili kulo mthetho lo wokuqala sisakhulume ngawo. Nala usuku sakhuluma ngento esiyibiza ngani ngenhlokana kabili yomqiqo. Lento siyibiza nge-simple time egameni lani lesingisi. Lapha yana uvumelekile futhi only if sibiza ngani ama-quavers. Ama-quaver wethu mengabe ewu6 or ingxenye yani yenoti elinesiqe esisodwa. Uyakhona ukuthi uwahlanganise wonke kuphela kodwa mengabe u6. Mengabe kwenye into mengabe u4 awenzi akwazi ukwahlanganisa. Wahlanganisa u6 kuphela.
The third exception is that in 4/4 time, 4 quavers can be beamed together, provided that they do not cross the middle of the bar. Now look at the screen so you can see what I mean. If there are 8 quavers in the bar, the first 4 can be beamed together and the second 4 beamed together, not all 8 together. But in the second example, you've got 2 beamed together, then 4, and then 2. That is incorrect. There have to be 2 groups of 4 so that the bar can divide equally down the middle.
Kulula ukuthi umfundi enze iphutha mangabe sikhuluma ngalezi zinto ezikanje. Into ekumele uyiqaphelisise kahle ukuthi mengabe kuno 4/4 ingxenye yenoti elisiqisinye ungakhona ukuyihlanganisa. Kodwa ukwazi ukuthi wahlanganise abe u8 kanye. Sekurong masuku kanjalo. Ukwazi nje ukuhlanganisa igroup eyenza iqoqwana elizokwenza 4 ehlangene nelinye iqoqwana lesibili elizokwenza 4 ohlangene ngoba into ebalekile senza ini umqiqo ozohlukana kabili ngoba sikhuluma ngani la sikhuluma ngento ekuthiwa uhlukano kabili lomqiqo. Mobheka ngalapha kunezibonelo eziwu2. Leso singenhla ahlanganisiwe awu4 ahlanganiswa amanye awu4 isona esilungile correct esingasebenzisi. Ngezansi kukhona ahlanganiswa abamabili kwaphinde kwahlanganiswa awu4 kwahlanganiswa amabili futhi. Meke kanje ayisekho ke right say wrong. So uma uqaphele lokho nje uzoba right.
At last we get to Rule 2. So Rule 2 is always group notes so that they represent one pulse in the time signature. Let's have a look at the example that I've put there. It's in 4/4 time. First you have a crotchet, then a quaver, then 4 semiquavers, another quaver, a dotted quaver, and a semiquaver. Now, we want to make each of the groups equal to one pulse. The pulses in 4/4 time are crotchets. The pulse is crotchets, so everything is got to equal to 1. The first note is equal to 1, so it stands on its own. The second note is worth half, and the next 2 notes are worth quarter each. So a half plus a quarter equals 1. So those 3 notes have to be grouped together, as you can see in the example. Then you have 2 more semiquavers, a quarter plus a quarter, and then a crotchet, a quaver, which is equal to a half. 2 quarters plus a half is equal to 1, so they need to be grouped together. And so you go through the whole example. All of the groups of notes need to equal 1 in 4/4 time or in any simple time. In compound time, where the pulses are equal to 1.5 because those are dotted crotchets, the same would apply.
Uma sesibheka lesibonelo sesidlulile ke manje kumthetho wokuqala sesiya kumthetho wesibili. Lana ke sisuke inhloso yethu kukwakha umqiqo lo esithe igama la khona lesingisi ipulse. La ilophungana sineziqi la. Isiqi inoti lokuqala linesiqi esisodwa, elesibili ingxenye yalo shuthi uhalf. Ingxenye mesikhuluma ngengxenye yesiqi esisodwa sikhuluma ngohalf waleli lokuqala. Bese siba nengxinyana futhi encane kuya ngokuya le lokho okunemisila emibili sikhuluma ngento eyingxenyana. Uma ngabe uthatha uyibala izokukhiphela into engangekhoda kodwa sisazofika ke lapho kuyichaza ngenamba. Bese ke siyawahlanganisa manje ukuze sikhiphe lento ekuthiwa umqiqo. Umqiqo wethu ufanele ulingane nebeat eyodwa noma isiqi esisodwa lingana necrochet. Mangabe sisihlanganisa ke sesigroupa sizohlanganisa wonke lawa ya sibone ukuthi mesihlanganisa uhafu nekota nelinye ikota kuzohlanganisela u1 kanjalo fanele nje yonke into esihlanganisa sikhiphele ipulse.
Now, in compound time, this can be slightly more complicated because the pulses are dotted crotchets. So let's have a look at the next example to see how the notes are grouped. 6/8 tells us that there are 6 quavers in the bar or 2 dotted crotchets in the bar. A dotted crotchet is worth 1.5. So all of the groups of notes now have to be worth 1.5. So let's have a look at that first bar. The first note in the first bar is worth 1 because it is a crotchet. Then we have a quarter and a quarter with the semiquavers. So all of those notes, the crotchet and the 2 semiquavers, are actually one group. But a crotchet doesn't have a flag that can be beamed. So it stands on its own, but the 2 semiquavers are grouped together. Then you see 3 quavers after that. Each quaver is worth a half. A half plus a half plus a half is equal to 1.5. So all those 3 have to be beamed together because they are worth 1.5.
Mesibheka naso sinye isibonelo la sesikhuluma ngani nge-compound time. Igama lakhona lesizulu lithi inkomba sikhathi engxube. Sikhuluma la ngokuthi mangabe sakha ipulse lesibize ngani ngomqiqo. I-crochet yethu sakha kahle ivalue ezolingana i-crochet. I-crochet sithe ilingana nesiqi esinye bese siba nene amanye amanothi alandelanayo awu2 siwabiza ngengxenyana ezokwakha yona isiqi sibe sinye. Kodwa njengoba sinengxenyana fa sibe careful ukuthi sihlanganisa kanjani. Ingxenyana enemsile u2 kanje ilingana nekota iyodwa iyikota. Mesihlanganisa amakota ke siyakwazi ukuhlanganisa ikota nekota sihlanganise nohalf bese kuhlangana u1 ngoba inhloso yethu ukwakha ipulse lesibiza ngomqiqo.
Now, sometimes examples are going to be difficult about how we put these notes together. So sometimes it's helpful to put all of the note values as either a number or a fraction under each note so that you can put them all together. In simple time, the groups must all equal to 1. In compound time, the notes must all equal to 1.5. So let's look at an example. In this example, you can see that I've written down the value of each note underneath it. Okay, so the first note is worth 3/4. The second note is worth a quarter. And then I've drawn a line between the 2 notes or 3 notes or 4 notes which are equal to 1 because 4/4 is simple time. So everything has to equal to 1. So 3/4 plus a quarter is equal to 1. So we know that those 2 notes must come together. Then we've got a quarter plus a half. That equals 1. So we put those together. Then we have a quarter plus 3/4. That equals 1. So it must go together. So if you look at the top one going to the bottom one, you'll see how I've added the notes together so that they equal 1 and then have grouped them according to that.
Siphinde uyaqhubeka lo mthetho wathi sikhuluma ngawo umthetho wesibili. Mothatha ukubheka lapha ya sesosebenzisa imath ke kakhulu mase sifika la. Lana sifike sibe inothi lokuqala lethu linamakota amathathu. Uzokhumbula lento sike sayichaza ekuqaleni ukuthi inhloso yethu ukwakha u1. Zonke le namba esinazo njengoba sama fractions kanje sizoyihlanganisa mase sihlanganisa mase zakhe u1 sesiyazi ukuthi sinawo umqiqo oyipulse sesidlulela phambili. Muthatha ukubheka lento escreenini sakho kuhlukanise kwabili ngenhla kunesibonelo bese kuba ne-answer ngenzansi. Mangabe sofuna ukubona ukuthi kuhlanganiswe kanjani uzocompare ubuke lapha ngaphezulu ubone ukuthi leli note lethu elingxenye yesiqi esisodwa eline-dot kanje lihlanganiswe nelinye leli elingxinyane nemsila emibili bese kwakhiwa ipulse lapha kulesibonelo singenzansi kwakhiwa ipulse yokuqala then siqhubeke enemsila ewu2 ahlanganisiwe ndawonye ahlanganiswa naleli nemsila owodwa moyihlanganisa lezo zinto sinamakota amabili ahlangane no-half moyihlanganisa lonto kusikhuphela u1 siphinde sidlule kanjalo size siyophuma ngale igcine.
So our next rule is quite simple. Rests obey the same rules as notes do. So for example, if we look at 2/4, which is simple time, in the first part we've got 3 quaver rests. But we are dealing with crotchet beats or crotchet pulses. So the first 2 quaver rests can actually be added together into one, so because they equal 1. So you can write a ZC rest, then followed by a quaver rest. Look at the second example where we're in 6/8. There you've got a crotchet followed by 2 crotchet rests or ZC rests. Okay, that is actually incorrect because that actually looks like 3/4, not 6/8. Remember, in 6/8 where everything has to equal to 1.5, right? So the crotchet is equal to 1, so we still need a half to finish off that group. So instead of having a crotchet rest there, we actually have to have a quaver rest. The 1 of the crotchet plus the quaver rest half is equal to 1.5. Now we are grouped correctly.
Lana ke sesikhuluma ngempumulo la ukuthi uphumula kanjani. Kucishe kufane naloko ebesikwenza ngemumva emva kwale slide lesi. Lana ke umehluko khona into ekumele uyiqaphele ukuthi mesikhuluma ngempumulo nazo zine value yakhona. Lesiya sokuqala osibona kulewa isibonelo sethu sokuqala ekufike kube into engathi u7 leya sibiza ngani ngengxenye yesiqi ifana nequaver kahle kubalekile ukuthi mangabe sesizigroupa or sihlanganisa uqale ngalesi sine value enkulu kulandele ivalue encane kanjalo njengoba ubona nje ngala kulesibonelo esesingala kulo 2/4 ongale kuqalwe ngoZC omele isiqe esisodwa kwabese kwaba khona u7 lo into ebalekile sifuna ukuyenza senza kubo 1 no half fanele mwazi ukuthi kubalwa amalo mekubala nje i-simple time wazi ukuthi kuhlanganiswa lo ngenhla inamba eshoyo ukuthi sikhuluma kwi-bus sikhuluma ngama-beats amangaphi lo ngenzansi usichazela ukuthi inhloboni yama-beats esikhuluma ngawo lapho then bese siba ne-compound la enzansi nayo i-compound khona into aqede ukuyisho uDoc ethi mawubuka la sibonelo sokuqala kufike sibe nesiqe esisodwa esiyi-crotchet silandelwe ezinye impumulo ezimbili ezimela ama-crotchet kukhona into wrong ke lapha mawubhekisisa kahle into esiyakhaya kwi-compound time sifike sakhe isiqi esizohamba no half eceleni kwaso lapha ya awukho half so leya nto leya inokungapheleli ngendlela.
Rule number 4. In simple time, avoid using dotted rests. In compound time, rests must conform to the following convention, and this is very important. When a whole pulse is a rest, now remember, a pulse in compound time is a dotted crotchet. When a whole pulse is a rest, it must either be a dotted rest or a crotchet followed by a quaver rest. If you look at the bottom of the page, you'll see that I've written down a crotchet rest plus a quaver, crotchet rest or a quaver, instead of quaver rest, crotchet, quaver rest, crotchet. The most valuable rest must come first, the one that equals 1, and then the next one half after that, okay? So it's always going to be the crotchet followed by a quaver rather than a quaver followed by a crotchet. Very, very important. I call it the 2-1 rule. A crotchet is equal to 2 quavers. A quaver is equal to 1 quaver. 2 followed by 1. In 6/8, everything must be 2 followed by 1.
Nakuko kunye ekumele sikuqaphele abafundi abaningi bayawenza amaphutha ngaloko. kumele si-avoid ukuthi sifake impumulo ezinama dot lawaya ngoba manje senzelani senzela ukuthi into oyibhalayo phansi kube lula ukuyifunda. Nanokunye okubalekile futhi esizokwenza mongabe ubhala so wagroupa kahle ama-rest wakho. Enza sure ukuthi ekuqaleni kuba khona ingxenye kuba khona isiqi esisodwa esiphelele emva kwaso bese ulandela ngengxenye yaso isiqi. Fase sibe nento eno 1.5 singabi no half and a 1. So mangabe silungise lapho senza sure ukuthi siqala ngevili enkulu silandele ngencane. Lapho sizoba right.
Rule number 5. In compound time, if a quaver falls at the beginning of a pulse and is followed by rests for the rest of the pulse, 2 quaver rests should be used rather than a crotchet rest. And this comes again in result of that 2 + 1 rule. Have a look at the example on the screen. You'll see that there is a quaver followed by 2 quaver rests rather than 1 crotchet rest. The reason for this is in compound time, we are always trying to obey the rule 2 + 1, not 1 + 2. If we had a quaver followed by a crotchet rest, that would be 1 + 2, not 2 + 1. So in a case where you just have a quaver by itself, it must be followed by 2 7 rests, or the quaver rests.
Umthetho wesihlanu ke lesikhuluma ngawo okunye okubalekile kumele sikunakisise kakhulu ukuze singawenza amaphutha ilo mthetho kade kukhulunywa ngawo manje ukuthi sino 2 and a 1 wenzelani le nto leya ukuthi wazi ukuthi siqala ngevili enkulu njalo mesibala siqala ngevili enkulu sigcine ngencane. Ama quaver rest lawa siwabiza ngani ngengxenye yesiqe esisodwa mengabe emabili kanje ayalingana nengxenye yodwa kodwa kube nenhloso njengoba sifake kwangabi iZC rest safaka kwaba o7 rest labaya senzelani ukuthi kungabi ngoba izophambana manje sekuzoba u1 and a 2 ngcono kube ukuthi ayalingana wonke lawa ngala iqaleni ukuze ibe khona le nto lokudivide into 3 ngoba sikhuluma ngani ngalento siyibiza ngenkomba sikhathi enxube.
Rule number 6 is easy. Rests cannot be tied. Remember we learnt about notes being tied together. Rests cannot be tied.
Umthetho olula kakhulu ke lo kumele siubambe futhi nawo ukuthi ama rest noma impumulo asikwazi ukuzihlanganisa. Kuhlezi nje uzobhala impumulo izimele ngayodwa wahlanganisa.
At last we're at the last rule, which is also an easy one. In any empty bar, in any time signature, you are always going to use a semi-breve rest to indicate that the whole bar is empty. So for example, in 6/8 time, where you're actually dealing with 6 quavers in a bar or 2 dotted crotchets in a bar, if we were to total that up, it would be equal to 3, not 4. But for convention's sake, we'll use a semi-breve rest to indicate that a whole bar, if it's empty, is completely empty. You have to use a semi-breve rest.
Nako kokugcina esivala ngawo umthetho wesikhombisa. Lana ke mangabe uhlangana nebar engenalutho nje engenawo amanothi usihlezi uzofaka le esiyibiza nge-semi-breve noma inothi elineziqe ezine ukuthi noma ngabe ukhuluma ngayiphi inhlukano sikhathi or inkomba sikhathi akukhathazekile noma u64 u48 u24 noma ngabe yipi kodwa mangabe kungenalutho kungenamanothi uyayifaka leya emele isemi-breve.
Now you may be asking a question. Why do we have to use all of these rules? Or do I have to use these rules? Well, the reason that these rules have been designed is to help your eye or any musician's eye to be able to read music as easily as possible. Our brains work in a way that says if I group things together in a similar way all the way through the music, I get used to the pattern and I can perform it more easily. And every time I see that pattern again, I'm more likely to play it correctly the first time if I know what it means. So it's important to know that these rules are to help your brain to be able to perform more quickly when you see music, or to be able to sight read more easily. That's the only reason for these rules. They're designed so that your brain gets used to a way of doing things, and it always does it, and it gets better at it every time it does it. Okay? The other thing to point out is that these rules you'll only become better at if you practice them. And I've given you examples in the worksheets for you to practice over and over and over again. Until you get used to doing these things over and over again and getting them right every time, it is likely that you won't be able to do them immediately when you have to do some written examples. And that means essentially that you're not going to get better at sight reading. Our whole idea about teaching you theory in this particular method is to help you to become a better sight reader, so that when you sit down at the piano or at your instrument and somebody puts a piece of music in front of you for the first time, you'll be able to read it right there and then. That's our aim, and that's why these rules are so important.
Uku-eda nje noma ukugcizelela kuloko akushoyo uDoki. Lemithetho leyenzelwe ukuthi kube lula, kube uhlelo olulula, nanombani akwazi ukuthi awufunde umculo obonayo mekubekwa nje la kuwena uhlelo lomculo. Ungaloke uthathe isikhathi eside ukubhala, ukuwufunda ukuze ukwazi ukudlala, kungaba upiano, isiginci nanoma yiluphi uhlelo lwensimbo olisebenzisayo. Kumele sinakekeleke, siqaphele la lemithetho yonke lesifundisiwe namhlanje. Okunye okubalekile futhi ukuze ukwazi nanoma umuphi umculo ophumelele ukurehearse practice, kubalekile wenze sure ukuthi ukuze ukwazi ukuyibamba ube right.
The last thing that I want to say is a big thank you to all of the students who have helped me to put these videos together in Zulu and in English. I've used students who are already students here at the university so that you, as a student watching this video, will feel comfortable knowing that somebody else has already mastered these things and knows how to do them, so that you too will know that you have confidence to be able to do this as well. I hope they've been helpful for you, and I wish you everything of the best for the rest of the course.